Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in a second. Just want to let everyone join. This is being recorded, so if you had friends who signed up but couldn't make it at the last minute, we can send the recording to them. We were just talking. I think I'm going to put it on our YouTube channel tomorrow, so we'll get it out there. So don't feel bad if you couldn't join at the last second. Give it another minute or so. So the way this is going to work is we're going to do two quick presentations by John first and then Chris, and then they will both take questions at the end. So if you have any questions at any time, you can put them in either the chat or the Q&A for either John, Chris, or both of them. But we will probably hold them unless they're like if you have anything like clarifying or technical, I'll get right on that. But otherwise, we're going to try to hold the questions until after both of their presentations. Okay, so it looks like it's kind of leveled out. So yeah, once again, thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to turn it over to John to start the presentation.
Great. Thanks a lot, Jill. And thanks, Chris. Thank you, everyone who is attending here. Appreciate it. My name is John McCone. I'm the Education and Policy Specialist for the Merrimack River Watershed Council. This background behind me is the Merrimack. I don't know if anybody knows where this is. This is a place called Muchieto Banks. It's just north of Concord. It's a really interesting spot. It's actually the only inland sand dune in New Hampshire. So it's a pretty cool place to visit if you ever go there. So tonight we were going to talk about something we haven't talked about much with the Merrimack River Watershed Council. We focus a lot on pollutants like combined sewage overflows and PFAS and things that are coming into the river like stormwater. But tonight we want to talk a little bit about this issue that's been becoming much more public in recent years, and that is we have the last coal-fired plant in New England on the Merrimack River. So I'm sure some of you have actually seen it and maybe not known what it is if you've traveled in along 93 in New Hampshire. So I'm going to start a slideshow presentation and just give you a little insight into what this plant's all about, and also some of the steps that you might want to consider doing if you want to do something about it. Okay. Great. Okay. Hoping everyone can see this. So just a little bit about us. If you're not familiar with who we are, Merrimack River Watershed Council, our general goal is pretty simple. We just want to make the river cleaner and healthier for the next generation. We've been around for about 50 years. We've had a lot of success over the years. And the issues facing the Merrimack change over the years. You know, a lot of the pollutants that we were dealing with 50 years ago have been largely taken care of, but they're just new crops of things that are happening. And we have to always be mindful of what's happening in the future. One of the issues now is climate change and how that's going to impact the Merrimack. So this is a little different subject, but it's related to climate change and also to the health of the river. And that is this coal-fired plant that's called the Merrimack Station. So this is where it's located. If you can see the map, it's just south of Concord. If you've ever traveled on 93, heading north or south between the Hooksett tolls and Concord, you've probably seen the smokestack on it. It's enormous. It's right along the Merrimack. Often you'll see a plume of smoke coming out of it, of steam rather. This is what it looks like if you you get up close. You see the Merrimack behind it. In this picture, you can see the coal deposits on the left-hand side. So this is a pretty old plant. This was built in 1968 when our power needs were very different than they are today. It's the last pure coal-fired plant in New England. There's one other plant that it's in Newington that has some coal use and also some other energy that it uses. This plant was recently re-granted a permit to operate through 2025. It's owned by an out-of-state company right now, Granite Shore Power. A few other things about it. So this plant is not operating all the time. It used to, but now it only operates during peak power. And that's periods when we have the hottest days during the summer or the coldest days in the winter when the power grid is really stressed and it needs a little bit more energy. This plant will come online, but at the same time, you know, there's a lot of costs involved in just having this plant sitting idle. So ratepayers pay about $1 million a month just to keep this plant basically ready to operate whenever it's needed. Then it only operates a few days per year. So just to give you a kind of an overview of what's going on with coal, coal is fading in terms of its importance in our power grid in New England. So you look back at 2000, it was about 20% of our power. Today, it's maybe 1 to 2%. So it's fading pretty fast. You can see in this graph that renewables are growing. Another area that's growing a lot is natural gas, which is where we get a lot of our power. Just for an example, this is where our power today came from, as in today that we're living in right now, March 3rd. Most of our power came from natural gas, a little from nuclear. Basically, none of it came from coal today. You can also see in this graph, this comes from ISO New England, that there was a substantial amount of power that came from renewables, a lot from wind today, not so much from solar, I think just because it's this time of year, and some other sources as well. But just a few days ago, this plant was operating and coal was 2% of our power for our region. So now it's not as important because it's warmed up a bit. So one of the questions people might have is, why is coal so bad? And it's really one of the sort of the oldest sources of power we have, and it's pretty archaic compared to what the technologies are now. So it's a fossil fuel. When it's burned, it emits an enormous amount of greenhouse gases, far more than other sources, and so it's heating up the planet. You have lots of toxic residue that comes from it, fly ash, and mining itself, mining of coal is extremely destructive to the environment. Entire mountains are basically bulldozed and broken up to get to it in some cases, and then sort of rebuilt. But there's a lot of runoff that comes from it, a lot of environmental damage right around these mining sites. So I'm not going to get into all that stuff. What I want to talk about is why the Merrimack River Watershed Council is interested in this plant. Now, what is its impact on the Merrimack? So a few things. The amount of water that it uses might surprise you. It also warms the temperature of the river significantly. And there is also water pollution that comes from this plant. So I'll go through water usage first. So this plant uses what's called a once through system. That means it sucks in water from the Merrimack. It runs it through the plant for it to create steam to power its turbines. That water is then brought back out of the plant. It's cooled down somewhat. It goes into an enormous pool outside the plant, and then it goes back into the Merrimack. And this water that goes into the Merrimack can be up to 88 degrees. That's significantly warmer than usually the background temperature of the water in the Merrimack. At peak capacity, this plant can draw up to 275 million gallons each day. And to give you a sense of that, the flow of the river in that area, that could be on an average day, that could be a quarter, a fifth, sometimes a half, sometimes more than that, the amount of water that's coming down the river. So it's a big drain on the river. And it puts this strain on this section of the river that's known as the Hooksett Pool. And I'll show you what this is. So here's a map of the what's called the Hooksett Pool. And it's basically a section of the Merrimack River that's defined by 2 points. Upstream point is called the Garvin's Falls Dam. The lower point is the Hooksett Hydro Dam. And between this, the Merrimack tends to run a little bit more slowly. It's sort of an impoundment area. And this power plant sits right in the middle of this impoundment area. It's not a very deep section of the river either. So when you have a heat source, it tends to influence it much more. And the river is not running as quickly here as in other portions. So a few years ago, there was a lawsuit that was filed over this plant by the Conservation Law Foundation, the Sierra Club, and they found that there were times when this plant drew up to 2/3 of the river's flow. And in times of extreme drought, the intake from the plant can actually draw water back upstream in the wrong direction in order to satisfy the needs of the plant. Another issue with this plant is that it warms the temperature of the river, as I mentioned. This is what you're seeing here in this picture is this sort of a lagoon area that water is released into to cool it, and then it goes back out into the Merrimack River. So this temperature I was mentioning, it's typically significantly hotter than the river itself. And this creates this condition within this section of the river that's too hot for some of the cold water fish and animals that live in this section of the Merrimack. And so what we've seen over the years is there's been a change in the animal life that lives in this area of the river. And there's also concerns that fish that are trying to migrate, these would be colder water fish, when they hit this area of the river, it's much more difficult for them to get through it because this is not an environment that's conducive to them. Again, according to this lawsuit that was filed by Sierra Club, these water fluctuations, especially during the winter, can create these what are called cold shocks. So you get this warming effect when this plant comes online on very cold days, warms up the river, then it shuts down, and then the river cools down very quickly, and that can lead to die-offs and also just a bad environment for animal life. Another issue with this plant is it does produce some water pollution. There is a long list of wastes that come from production of coal power. I'm not going to go into all of it in this because it would take us to like 11 o'clock tonight. But some of this is treated on site. Some of it is released into the river in very limited amounts, which is monitored by the EPA. But there is some pollution that comes out of this plant. And there is, if you're interested, there's an 800-page permit that was released in 2020 that goes into much more details. And I'll put up a link at the end of this if anyone's interested in checking it out. So you might have heard something about this plant in recent years because there's been a lot of protests that have happened. There's a few environmental groups that have gone out and tried to do civil disobedience acts at the plant, such as they blocked the coal trains. They took some of the coal from the plant, they dumped it on the State House steps, sort of a dramatic statement. Entrances were blocked. There was a kayaktivist event out on the river. So there's often activity going on, maybe about every 1 or 2 months, that's really catching a lot of headlines. A lot of people have been arrested for these acts as well. So what does the plant say about this? The plant ownership play about it? It's kind of interesting. I think the most interesting piece of what they're saying is that they see that it doesn't impact the environment as much as it would if it was on all the time. It would have some impact on the power grid, perhaps, in these cold and hot days, and we do need our power grid. So that's their argument. But probably the most interesting piece, I think, is they recognize, as does ISO New England, that alternative energy is the future of this country and that we need to start to transition to it. And this plant is just sort of a relic of the past that's still needed somewhat, on certain days, but its time is numbered. Problem is, we don't know when that last day is going to be. As I mentioned, the permit expires in 2025. We don't know if it's going to be renewed or not. So that's something we're going to keep an eye on. So often when we talk about these issues with the Merrimack that might cause concern for people, they want to know, well, what can I do that would help the river? So one of the things you can do is you can consider solar power, because this is something that you can do on your own in your home that actually does have a real impact, tangible impact on an issue that faces the river. And the other thing you can do is just keep an eye on this issue, express your opinion about the Merrimack Station. And I can send you a couple of links to check out if you want to find some more information. One is ISO New England. So this is our power grid company. You can find out more about what's going on with our power grid and where our power comes from and what the future of our grid is going to be. The other thing you might be interested in looking at is the permit for this particular plant. And this is as I mentioned, this is an 800-page document. So it'll take you some while to bang through it, but you might find some stuff in there that's interesting. Other thing you can do is just check out the news. There's a lot of news that's going on regarding this plant, especially with these protests. So that's what I had to say about the plant. And Chris, maybe you can talk about solar energy and how that plays a role here.
Yeah, thank you, John. Let me see. I think I'm probably good to share my screen at this point. So first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Chris Kelly. I was telling John, we jumped on a couple minutes early and telling John that I'm proudly a resident of the Merrimack River Watershed. I live in Manchester. I drive by or over the river virtually every single day, and I see the smokestack from the plume from the smokestack literally every time I leave my house. You can see it quite well framed by the trees on either side of Union Street heading north in Manchester. So, it's a little bit of motivation for me, when I get up and go to work every day. So I'm here to talk a little bit about solar. We're going to, not get too granular today, kind of talk a little bit big picture about the technology, what it can do for folks at their homes, and businesses and even opportunities in municipal applications as well. So I work at Revision Energy. Just advance the slide here. Revision is 100% employee owned. We were founded in 2003. Way back then, founded in Liberty, Maine. Started off as a solar hot water company, but But a few years ago, the original owners decided that the best thing for this business, from both a business and a moral perspective, was to transfer the ownership of the company to its employees. You can see a photo of the best team in solar, in my humble opinion, right there on the right. We are a certified B Corp. It is also B Corp month. If you don't know what a B Corp is, think Ben and Jerry's, Patagonia, basically businesses that are trying to use their business to create positive change in the world and in their community. So sometimes known as the triple bottom line: people, planet, profit. As I said, we were founded in Liberty, Maine. We're now headquartered in South Portland. We have 2 offices in New Hampshire, 1 in North Andover, Mass, and we do some work over the Connecticut River in Vermont as well. We, I think, have a very, very well-earned reputation nationally for the great work that we've done, which is why we've been consistently voted #1 rooftop solar contractor in New England. Talking a little bit about our mission. I mentioned we're a B Corp. We're definitely a mission-driven company, and you can read our mission right there. We will lead our community in solving the environmental problems caused by fossil fuels while alleviating economic and social injustice. Our vision: our kids, grandkids, and future generations will enjoy a clean environment and just society throughout New England. I can just tell you personally, it feels really, really good to work at a company that is not only mission driven, but also walks the talk. In my own private life, I'm a member of the Manchester NAACP, where I co-chair the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee with a friend of mine that some of you may know. He works at CLF as their environmental justice advocate, Arnold McColo. And it's really been incredible to join a company like Revision and see not only their commitment to the ecological aspect here, but also the social justice aspect of the fossil fuel industry and economy that we've all grown up in, and trying to do something to change that. So how do solar panels work? Without getting too technical, solar panels are basically made of a number of different materials, but the critical one is silicon. And because of the atomic makeup of silicon, you can basically sandwich it in glass. It's a little more complicated than this, but basically sandwich it in glass. And every time it's hit by sunlight, those photons that are coming from the sun 93 million miles away are knocking loose electrons within the panel. And we are essentially converting photons into electrons. So there's no moving pieces, and there's really no damage, no real degradation. I mean, the glass on the panel will slowly cloud, but that's over decades. So solar is really awesome because, especially in roof-mounted applications or static ground-mounted applications, it's really set it and forget it. There are no moving pieces. There's very little maintenance, which is why we've seen some of the incredible cost declines, and municipalities and companies all over the world in the country realizing that solar is a great choice for them, because essentially you pay that upfront cost and there's virtually no maintenance from there on. Net metering. What is net metering? Net metering is basically the regulatory framework within which we are credited for overproduction. So as you can probably imagine, the sun is quite predictable. We know, based on the latitude that we're at, how much solar radiation falls at our latitude on an annual basis. It doesn't always line up with our consumption, right? The sun is down right now. I have a couple of lights on in my office here. we're doing different things around the house. My wife and I actually have an electric vehicle. It is currently charging in the garage, but the sun's not up. So net metering is kind of the basis for how we're compensated for producing when we may not be consuming quite as much. And my next slide will hopefully, illustrate that a little better. What you see here on the graph on the left in green is solar production. So you can see the hours of the day. And I just ripped this off a website, but so this isn't from my house. I don't know where this is necessarily from. And you can probably actually see that's my house behind me with the solar panels. So the green represents the solar production throughout the day. So, you can see it climbing in the morning, and then we've got some more jagged jumps and drops there around noon, and then a big drop, maybe a big old cloud came through, or potentially a tree, has a shadow just passing across the roof at that point. But that's our production throughout the day. The red you can see is consumption. So most modern solar arrays now, the ones that we sell for sure, now have consumption monitoring included. So what you can see in blue is actually self-consumption. And the reason I thought it would be helpful to to show this is because, like I said, our load demand and our production is not always matched up perfectly. So I live in Eversource territory. Right now we're paying about 20.5 cents all in per kilowatt hour. And for net metering, for exported kilowatt hours, we're getting about 15.5 cents. About 15 cents. So we're getting around 75 cents on the dollar, right? Pretty good deal. But basically, anytime sunshine is hitting the solar panels, they're making power, right? The first responsibility of that power is to go to whatever your load demand is in that moment. I hope you folks can see my cursor here, but you can see before the sun comes up, we have some small loads in the house. And then here you can see this blue jump right here. Maybe we turn on the coffee maker or flip on a few lights, anywhere that's blue right there. Self-consumption is really where we get the full value of solar. We're consuming, sometimes you might hear behind the meter. And really what that means is those are kilowatt hours that we're consuming that we don't have to buy at the full retail rate from Eversource or whoever your utility is. And two, those aren't kilowatt hours that would otherwise be sold back to the utility at a bit of a discount. So everywhere you see in blue on this graph is where we're getting, the highest value for the energy we're producing in that moment. That doesn't mean that excess production here in green doesn't have value. And what I also did was include a couple of snips from my bill, my electric bill at my home. So this was our most recent one. You can see purchases and sales here. So we purchased or brought in 1,608 kilowatt hours, and we overproduced 457. Now, my wife and I heat with heat pumps, which are a hyper efficient electric heating and cooling technology. We heat our hot water with a heat pump hot water tank, also using electricity, and we have an electric vehicle. So our load is pretty high. But this time of year, obviously, the sun is a little lower in the sky. It's out for fewer hours. So most folks will be, probably consuming a little bit more on a net basis than they're producing. However, you can see down here for us, this is a billing period from June to July. We had only 594 kilowatt hours purchased. So, at nighttime and maybe on cloudy days or things like that, where we're running, we're operating the home, but not producing all that much. But we exported, quite a bit more, 1,075 kilowatt hours. So that's really the kind of the basis for your bill when it comes to net metering. The solar journey, so sizing your system. I'm a solar design specialist. I work on the residential team. You can see my colleague Amy here, and either I will or my colleague Jill will post a cool video of Amy did. I think the program is called I Build New Hampshire on New Hampshire PBS. And they followed her for a day, and there's like a half an hour episode of her doing a full site evaluation for a potential solar client of ours. So if you want to get a little more nuts and bolts on that, we can share that for you. But basically, when we size your system, we're doing a couple of things. First thing we do is most times we have a solar advisor who basically qualifies the opportunity, calls you on the phone, has a quick conversation. How do you heat your home? How many folks live there? How do you heat your hot water? We ask to look at your electric bill, so we have some understanding of your historical consumption. But really the most critical part is once we get out, we set a site visit date, we come out for an evaluation. You can see what Amy is doing right there. She's just having a conversation, pretty informal, casual conversation with the homeowners about what their goals are. So, not everyone has the same goals. Some folks want to offset, 100% of their usage or more. Some folks, just want to, maybe they have a budget of, X number of thousands of dollars, and they just want to get what they can on that. So really what we want to do is understand what your goals are first. Most folks, that being said, do want to offset their usage if possible. So that's where the electric bill really comes in handy, because we can gauge how much, usage have you been, how much electricity have you been consuming, over the past year, or maybe even more. So when we do that, we take some roof measurements. We understand how many solar panels could actually fit on the roof. If you have a nice big yard, we also do ground mounted systems too. And we can size the system based on what your goals are compared to that consumption. We can model in additional usage for, like I said, heat pumps, where we're taking dollars out of the oil or propane budget and moving them into the electric budget, and then offsetting them with clean, cheap solar power. Or if you're planning on getting an EV, we can help folks model, load growth in the future potentially, so they can size that system appropriately on the front end. Installation, we are 100% employee-owned company. So everyone who ever sets foot on your property, if you're working with revision, is an owner of the company. We do a really thorough job. We have a fantastic team of engineers, and designers and everything, who then scrub the initial proposal and design that we provide to homeowners about 95% of the way, and then they scrub it, fine tune all the details, and we get a really airtight game plan for when our installation crews come to actually put this infrastructure onto your roof or out in your yard and tie it into your existing electric system. Savings, cost, and carbon. We can get very, very accurate production estimates. We can make some pretty educated guesses about your consumption. That side of the ledger is a little harder to pin down, but basically, when you get a proposal, what you would see is, let's say, hey, you consumed 9,000 kilowatt hours last year. If you were to consume 9,000 kilowatt hours for the next 25 years, and we model in a 3% annual rate escalator, which is about the historical average here in northern New England, here's what you could expect to pay, consuming 9,000 kilowatt hours a year for the next 25 years. Compare that with this solar investment, and the delta is the savings. We have all kinds of financial metrics, return on investment, annual ROI, and obviously we can determine how much carbon we're going to offset and give it to you in some more relatable metrics, like it's the equivalent of not driving 15,000 miles in the average American car or something like that each year. So speaking of installation, this is my home in Manchester. When I was getting my system installed, our crews came, and you can see, I'll just quickly pause that if I can. I have an asphalt shingle roof. We mount the feet and the rail horizontally for portrait orientation panels right here. So the crew gets up there, we've already done a structural analysis of every roof we install on. We know where the rafters are. We drill a little pilot hole that dies in the rafter, so it's not going to open attic space. Silicone sealant into that hole, lag bolt with a rubber gasket that secures the foot to the roof surface, and then we lay that rail across the roof. And then, as you'll see, the panels come up and they're laid down one by one. What you can't see here, you can see folks going in and out of my basement, tying in the inverters in the basement into the main service panel. So there go the panels. And you can see this is it'll be 2 years this summer, and just about all of our panels now are these pretty sleek all black panels that, if you have a nice rectangular roof, we can install some really nice symmetrical, aesthetically pleasing arrays for folks. Oops, let's go to the next slide here. There we go. So the 100% solar household, right? Solar is kind of the linchpin here, but the goal is to get off fossil fuels. So how do we turn those electrons into, heating and cooling and, locomotion and things like that? So as I mentioned, we have heat pumps, ductless heat pumps systems that we design and install. Heat pumps are hyper efficient because they're not creating heat. They're aggregating heat on one side of the system, moving it through refrigerant lines and dumping it indoors via an indoor unit. And then in the summertime, that process is reversed. We're gathering energy from inside, dehumidifying the air, and moving that energy, that heat, through the refrigerant lines where it's dumped outdoors by the outdoor unit. The same technology exists for hot water heating, where we're taking the energy from the ambient air mass around where your tank lives and moving it into the hot water supply. Much more efficient than any type of water heating, but especially compelling if you have a traditional electric resistive tank. Electric vehicles, obviously, more and more prevalent every day. If you haven't test driven one, I'd highly recommend it. They're great. And any of these technologies, anything that runs on electrons is going to be obviously cleaner, but more economical to actually operate too when we're powering it with that clean, cheap solar kilowatt hour. Finally, battery storage. We offer battery storage. Folks may not know that, if you have solar like my wife and I do, but you don't have batteries, we don't. If the grid goes down, and even if the sun is out, our system shuts down. Rapid shutdown protocol by code, and that's to protect the folks working on the lines, trying to get the grid back up and running for everyone. If you do have a battery, that's really great, because then you can go through basically a perpetual discharge recharge cycle indefinitely if the weather cooperates. But the battery basically takes over. We design them to, those systems, depending on what capacity, depending on what you want to operate, when the grid might be down. One thing, I want to thank John, the presentation he gave. I did not realize that the Bow plant only ran at times of peak demand. Interestingly, I think this is where batteries could have a really awesome role to play in the future here in New Hampshire. If any of you have friends or family in Vermont, Green Mountain Power, the big utility in Vermont, has a demand response program. So what does that mean? Folks can get batteries installed at their home for little or no cost. I don't know the exact details, but big discounts. And then as that demand curve is peaking on the grid, John was showing the ISO, the demand curve on the grid, we can do what's called peak shaving in Vermont. Green Mountain Power can discharge all these batteries from around the grid out into the grid for folks to use, and we save money. And in New Hampshire, in this case, we could run that power plant a whole lot less if we had something like that. So I think that's our last slide. Nope, we got a couple of installation photos here. As you can see, solar makes people happy. Even dogs love it. Yeah, and I can tell you, it makes sunny days that much cooler when you can look at your phone and see all the clean energy you're making. It really is a satisfying feeling. Questions? So I guess, Jill, should I stop sharing my screen here?
I would actually leave it up because
Okay.
I think you're going to want to maybe refer to at least a couple of those photos.
Okay.
Anyone feel free to put questions in. We already have a few good ones, but keep dropping them in there. One question that I think you could use a photo or even your background on. Solar panels on a roof, consideration of the pitch of the roof and accumulation of snow.
Sure. Yeah, definitely a part of it, right? And that's part of what we do when we do a site evaluation. So, the panels on my roof are 360 watt panels. What does that mean? That's the nameplate rating of the panel. All solar panels are tested under the same conditions, the same intensity of light at the same angle, for the same duration of time, at the same temperature, all that good stuff. What does it mean when they're actually installed out in the world? Part of what we do, and I think, tell me if you can see this, Jill. Can you guys see this? Okay, so this is from a device that we use for evaluations called the Sun Eye, and this is on my back roof. So what you can see here is 6 a.m., 8 a.m., 10 a.m., 12, and so on. So this is the path of the sun throughout the day. And then on the y-axis here, we have the months of the year. So obviously summer solstice, the sun is highest in the sky and is out for the most hours of the day. As I mentioned, we know what the sun is going to do. So when we come to do a solar evaluation, or any reputable solar contractor anywhere in the world is going to do something like this, right? We're going to, put into this device where we are on the planet, so it understands the latitude and how much sun falls there. And then you can see here panel, right? So my roof, this is actually from my house. My roof is at 32 degrees and it's about 175 degrees on the compass. Now, for us here in southern New Hampshire, Boston, solar south is about 194 on the compass. Portland is about 195. So my house is about 20 degrees off, off south, but critically you can see 32 degrees right there. So we take those variables into account, and then based on where the shading obstructions, you can see, I took this in March 5th, 2020, so we didn't have leaf out yet, and we can go back and edit some leaves onto these trees and say, okay, we're gonna have leaves during these times of year, right? Put those in there, and then I will apply the changes, and we could see we went from about, I think that was like 92 or 93 down to 90% of the annual. We also factor in, 20 to 30 years of historical weather data. So we're taking into account, overcast days and snow. But basically, we take all those variables into account. With regards to snow, this was a big storm that we had right before Christmas last year. We got about 18 to 20 inches in Manchester. My wife and I had a lot of wind loading on our roof here, and I was awoken out of my sleep quite abruptly that night as this entire slab slid off the roof and landed on our deck. So depending on the pitch of the roof, snow and the consistency of the snow, the roof will slough itself most likely. You can see the garage array had not slid quite yet. But those are all considerations that we take into account, when we're thinking about solar on a year-round basis, and we are thinking about it that way, especially here in New England.
So that ties into a second question. Do you need a south-facing roof to get solar panels?
You do not. You do not. We do a lot of east-west orientation installations. The biggest single variable is sunshine, right? So, actually can you all see that number right there? So what this is telling us is solar access, 90%. May through October, we're getting 94% of the available sunshine. November through April at my home, 85%. If I were to change this and add 90 degrees and say, okay, we're going to be at 265 degrees, you can see those numbers actually went up. This may be getting a little too weedy. This is really the important number. Total solar resource fraction. That basically tells us how good of an opportunity it is at 32 degrees and 265 degrees on the compass. If I change that back to 175, you'll see that 73% go back up. All that being said, right? So now we're up to 89%. All that being said, you know, sunshine is the biggest single variable. We're not yet at the point where we're putting solar panels on north-facing roofs. You may see that around your neighborhood. That's probably a lease scenario where folks are buying back power at an established discount from a national chain. You know, we don't do the lease model. You know, it is nice for some folks who may not have the capital to invest on the front end or can't qualify for you know, compelling financing. But really, east, west, and south-facing aspects are all really productive, you know, if we're getting a decent amount of sunshine.
Okay, so next question might be for John. I think both of you could probably tackle it. So she said the first speaker, John, said that the coal plant generates about 2 or 3% of our electricity. So if enough of us get solar panels, can we shut it down?
Well, that's a great question. I wish I could say yes, but I think, you know, it's a complicated question. The more we do, the more solar we produce, the more energy that it's going to be in the system. ISO New England is looking into trying to have these massive areas where they can have this battery backup power. Chris is talking about people doing individual homes, but on a much grander scale, so that we can harvest energy, solar energy, wind energy, and hold it through these periods at nighttime or, you know, winter time. So yeah, you know, in a nutshell, if enough people were doing it, it seems like this would be the way to go. You know, this could help us to get rid of a plant like what's going on in Bow.
Yeah, my guess would be that the thing that's really going to shut down a plant like this is just the voice of the people. You know, we can install all kinds of solar all over New Hampshire, all over northern New England, and that's great, and that'll improve the grid mix. You know, every solar installation we you know, hook up, you know, makes the balance of power on the grid skew a little more towards clean energy. I'm not so sure that just, you know, more and more folks getting, I think they're kind of separate issues. I think really, and, you know, a lot of respect, I saw somebody was from 350 NH, you know, no coal, no gas, the folks that have been doing all this incredible work to try and John was mentioning it earlier, you're seeing it more and more in the news around New Hampshire. And I think generally we're seeing that in solar and renewables generally, you know, media of all kinds, independent media, nonprofit media, public media, mainstream media are all covering the climate crisis a lot more than they were even 3-4 years ago. So I think public awareness about these things is growing day by day. And so I think the thing that shuts down, you know, power plants like Bow is people demanding that, you know, there's a better way and we got to shut this thing down. You know, just one thing that occurs to me in Maine, where we're headquartered, you know, when Governor Mills came in, there was a bunch of legislation that was passed that made community solar farms a whole lot more viable, right? Community solar farms, and Revision has done a really nice job working with legacy Maine farming families so that we're not just clear cutting, you know, forests, but we're identifying families who have been farming land for a long time, find pastures or acreage that is not currently in use necessarily, and we can install large-scale solar farms there. And through some of the economies of scale, we can offer really, really compelling energy rates, and folks can actually buy into them. So when you buy shares in a solar farm, you can capitalize on the federal tax credit because you actually own that. We don't really have that in New Hampshire. So unfortunately for folks who live in, maybe you live on a beautiful wooded lot and all these, lovely trees around your house, they bring you a lot of benefits. Obviously, they keep your home cool in the summer, and, it's probably beautiful to walk outside your door, but you may not be a great candidate for solar. Here in New Hampshire, we have a 1 megawatt cap on community solar farm development. That has changed on the municipal level now. Just a few months ago, the net metering cap for municipal has jumped from 1 to 5 megawatts. So if you're involved with your town's energy committee, you can start talking to your neighbors about developing community solar resources. But renters too, crucially, so many folks in New Hampshire who don't rent, there are still barriers to entry for solar that companies like Revision are trying to work on. But I think policy has such a huge part to play in shutting down places like Merrimack Station, and for accelerating the development of offshore wind, solar, all these other clean resources that we should really have more of by now.
So that, I think, kind of answered the next question, which was, can you talk about community solar farms and how residents can get hooked up to it if we don't have solar?
Yeah, so I really kind of did touch on this, but you right now you really kind of have to do it through the municipal. That's not necessarily true. So nothing's stopping someone from developing a 1 megawatt solar array right now, but for developers like Revision, it's just not quite big enough to make it pencil out where it's super compelling for the off takers or the folks who would buy in. Once you start getting into that 2-3 megawatt size, that's where the costs really start to get super compelling. And folks who, like I said, either rent or don't have a great solar opportunity can jump in. Crucially, though, in Clean Energy New Hampshire and Community Power Coalition, like, people have been working on this for a long, long time. We do now have the net metering cap for municipalities has jumped from 1 to 5 megawatts. So get involved at the town level. We have town meetings coming up. Talk to your neighbors, go to your town meeting, say, hey, what are we doing to develop our own clean energy resources here in our communities? You can do that, and also call your representatives and say, hey, we want multiple bipartisan bills reached the governor's desk in the last few years to expand the net metering cap for development for companies like Revision, and they were vetoed. So, I think with the scale of the issue here, it's got to take policy change at a federal, state, and local level. So you can go to the town meeting and talk to your neighbors and your representatives about developing community resources right in your own backyard.
And I will say that is specific to New Hampshire. If you're in Maine, Mass, or Vermont, there are a lot more community solar options. And we have that on our website. Okay, Chris, a question about heat pumps. The question is, do your heat pumps run off of the solar panels? This woman says that hers are 240 volts and can't be run by solar.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's not 240 volts, not an issue. Heat pumps are a relatively big draw. So they're not ideal for battery backup necessarily. That's maybe a little more nuanced conversation than we want to get into. But yes, our heat pumps, my wife and I have an 18,000 BTU on our first floor. We have a 6,000 BTU in our bedroom, and we have 300 gallons of oil that have been in that tank for over 2 years. So we have the oil boiler there just for backup, just in case. but we do all our heating and cooling with electric. Now, obviously, the heat pumps are running right now, and the solar is not producing because it's nighttime. But generally, yes, heat pumps and solar are like peanut butter and jelly.
And then another question, who does the maintenance, monitoring, warranty of the system?
Yeah, revision. I always hesitate to say this because I never know. There's new solar contractors coming up all the time, but as far as I know, Revision is the only contractor in northern New England, maybe outside Sun Common, that has a 24/7 service department. So, you know, we do monitor systems, not every system actively all the time. That's what we ask folks to do, is every couple of weeks, log into your monitoring portal and make sure everything looks like it's operating as it should, because otherwise you'd never be able to tell that something had gone wrong unless a tree fell on your house or something. You'd never be able to look at a solar panel and say, oh, there's an issue with that. Warranties, we serve all our warranties. All our solar arrays are warranted for 25 years. Like I said, no moving parts. They're really, really reliable. But yeah, Revision has a 24/7 service team, and they do a fantastic job.
Okay, and then another question as we're getting to the end of the hour, but I'm trying to get all the questions in. Can you discuss solar energy options for nonprofits? How can a nonprofit organization fund the installation of a solar system?
Yeah, so this is a little outside my expertise, but you may have heard the name Dan Weeks before. Dan Weeks is a colleague of ours, and he's not only is he an all-around great guy, he's a solar whiz, and he works on our kind of commercial, municipal, institutional team. Revision has a group called RSIP, I think we call it, Revision Solar Impact Partners, where we find investors who want to invest in projects for where they. So I'm not a tax expert. I don't want to botch this, but basically we can do kind of like power purchase agreements where nonprofits can take the benefits of the solar energy. Investors can capitalize on the tax credits, and essentially let's take the YWCA has a big building in downtown Manchester. If they had solar on the building, but they didn't necessarily have the capital to take it up front. And honestly, one of the things that can be an issue with nonprofits, if you're not paying any taxes, you can't take any benefit from the tax credit, which is why we have outside investors who can capitalize on the tax credit. The benefit of the clean energy goes to the nonprofit. But Jill already mentioned this. We have an incredible website. I would encourage you to go to the website, Revision Energy Solar Impact Partners. So we work with nonprofits, churches, all kinds of folks like that. So it definitely can be done. And hopefully, in a previous iteration of Build Back Better, there was some talk of direct payment for instead of a tax credit. So if either low-income households or nonprofits who don't have any tax appetite can actually just get a check cut to them, would be a much more direct way to incentivize, clean energy deployment. And I'm happy to go past 8. If people have other questions, that's totally fine.
Yeah, it looks like there's maybe one more question that we haven't answered. I do just want to direct everyone's attention to the chat. There's a lot of really good stuff happening, including a couple different actions you can take related to the Bow coal plant. So if you haven't been looking at that, check it out. But yeah, so this is a good question, probably for both of you, but maybe mostly for Chris. From an environmental perspective, doesn't the lease versus ownership option for solar accomplish the same thing? Do both systems offset energy from the grid?
Absolutely, 100%. Yes, when it comes down to strictly the carbon accounting, portion of this, any solar panel, you know, is contributing. The big difference between lease and ownership models are that, you know, like I said, the lease model is nice if, you know, for folks who don't have the capital to invest upfront or can't qualify for financing that they find compelling or that works with their budget. The downside is you're not saving nearly as much money from a financial perspective over the life of the system. When you own the system, you know, you get a return on investment of X years, you know, and that's part of what I was talking about before, the methodology and how we say, okay, you used X kilowatt hours last year. If you use X every year for the next 25 years, you know, we project that, you know, this system would pay for itself in, you know, Y years. So from a financial perspective, if you can either, you know, pay for it out of savings or something like that, or, you know, finance a system, you're going to see much more financial benefit over the long term by owning that array. But yes, it, you know, the carbon accounting side is agnostic to how the system is paid for. So yes, from an environmental perspective, does not matter.
Awesome. Okay, well, I think those were the majority of the questions. If you have any other ones, feel free to reach out to us. I put a couple links at the bottom, and then you can email us hello@revisionenergy.com, which was in the event description. But yeah, and I'll get this recording. Like I said, the recording will be on YouTube tomorrow, and you can send it out via email as well. Do you guys? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Do we have that link for the episode with Amy, or can I Google that real quick? Do you have it handy?
I put it in the chat. It's
perfect. Okay.
Gotten a little bit buried. I can put it back in the chat again.
No, that's fine. I've been yapping away for a while, so I haven't been paying attention to the chat. So.
No, totally fine. Yeah, chat. Great chat tonight. Lots of good discussion about the coal plant and more. So awesome. John, do you have anything else you wanted to say?
No, I just want to thank you for this. And Chris, I want to double down on something you said. It was a great point earlier about how important it is when people want to make a change that they get involved and they, you know, they get something into the news. You know, this issue with the boat plant was off my radar screen, certainly, maybe a lot of other people, until all these individuals have been out and trying to make some action and try to get us to pay attention. And I think it works. And it is absolutely a good way to get a message across and to try to get people to understand and to take action.
One other quick plug on my end is B Corp Month, also Women's History Month. Shout out to all the incredible women, you know, around the world and on this call. B Corp Month. If you're interested in working for a B Corp or a mission-driven company, bwork.com is a job board where you can go and see what B Corps are hiring. And there's a bunch in New Hampshire. We've installed solar for a lot of them all over northern New England. And like I said, I think Jill would probably attest, by far the best professional experience of my career. I hope to retire at Revision Energy. So thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a good night.